Welcome to the Sales Compensation Show, where we share the latest sales performance insights through in-depth discussion with experts. Season 3 of our show is your backstage pass to discovering how today's most successful sales and revenue ops teams support go-to-market strategy and improve sales performance. Plus, we'll explore what we can learn about incentives from different industries more broadly. Subscribe to hear how leaders are unlocking new growth, implementing the latest compensation trends, and their priorities for improving go-to-market performance. I'm your host, CEO of Form AI, Nabil Alzam. Akira Mamizuka is the Vice President of Global Sales Operations SaaS at LinkedIn, overseeing the company's SaaS businesses, including Talent Solutions, which accounts for 60% of LinkedIn's B2B revenue. His scope also includes member and customer success operations and marketing planning and performance. Since joining LinkedIn, Akira has been pivotal in scaling operations globally. He began in Brazil, driving growth in the LATAM region, and later managed EMEA operations from Ireland for 2 years. Now based in San Francisco, he leads global sales operations with a focus on fostering collaboration and optimizing go-to-market execution. It's great to have you on the show, Akira. Looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for having me, Nabil.
Absolutely. As I was saying earlier, we're in kind of a profession and a role where you didn't wake up when you're 5 or 10 years old thinking that you're going to be in sales operations or sales compensation or, dealing with the complexity that is the world that we live in. Would love to hear your background, how you got here, and how you ended up in this space.
Great. Thanks for asking this question because I don't get asked this question very often. I think what got me here to sales operations in a tech firm like LinkedIn, I think there's two things. I started my career in consulting, and in consulting, I got to work in several different types of projects in several different types of industries. So I got to work on things related to efficiency, productivity, but also got to work in a lot of growth and revenue growth projects. And over time, I started to realize that my passion, my interests were always aligned with revenue growth, helping companies expand, grow revenue, expand internationally. So I always knew that after I left consulting, I would like to work at a company or a function that is helping companies grow. And sales operations is at the center of that. Sales operations is helping tech firms to grow, expand their presence, to scale internationally. And then the other reason is sales operations is a function that requires you to be a quote unquote a scientist, someone who's really good with data, who's intellectually curious, but also someone who brings a strong business leadership to the table, someone who cares about doing what's right for the company, someone who's comfortable challenging the status quo. And I see myself as someone who has those two traits. So bringing those to sales operations was a sort of a natural move for me.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. I feel like you have to have business literacy across the entire sales motion, all the way from pre to post engagement, the long-term relationship with the customer. But it does blend the world of the technical with kind of the art or the qualitative aspects of the business or sales motion. It's interesting because given your background, your experience across the board, I mean, obviously as a sales ops leader, and maybe just to jump right into it, what does effective cross-functional collaboration look like in a SaaS company?
And this is a topic where I spend a lot of my time on, working with peers, with colleagues in other functions to make sure that our teams are working well together, that the work is flowing well, the teams are partnering well together. So over time, I think I've learned a few things in terms of how to build that effective collaboration between teams, between functions. First of all, it starts within each of the specific functions in terms of each function having a very clear and well-defined understanding of what's the reason for them to exist, what they're solving for, what is the unique value they bring to the table, what are the key success metrics, their KPIs that are driving, and having that sort of a statement be well understood not only by members of the function, but also by the teams that function works with. So that is fundamental. Each function should have a very well understood vision. We call it vision to values at LinkedIn, which is a statement that defines the reason for the function exists and how we measure success in that function. And then beyond that, in terms of how to get functions to work well together, I see there's a set of tools that over the years we've started to use here at LinkedIn that I think they really help us getting the teams working well together. I'll mention them at a high level and then we can expand. Tools like Rapid and Racy, which helps teams understand what their role they play in making a decision or getting some work done. Really helpful, Rapid and Racy. And then tools that also help teams whenever they feel stuck, they can't really drive past a decision, or they can't figure out how to move forward because there's no alignment. We have some tools to help unblock teams, such as 5D alignment and clean escalation. We can talk more about those later. So I think there's a set of tools that help our teams collaborate and work well together.
I mean, it is quite critical to have that given the number of stakeholders involved in any single decision, within sales ops. Just to step back and bring it to life, any recent examples or any example that brings this kind of cross-team collaboration to life?
I have a very recent example. In LinkedIn, our compensation plan in SaaS hasn't changed much over the last almost 10 years, and is a pretty simple compensation plan, which is the reps are given a quota target that is measured in dollars, and they can hit their targets by selling any of our products. But over the years, our offering and our sales motions have evolved. And a few years ago, we launched what we call enterprise programs, which is an offering that allows customers to go all in to buy seats to all of their user base at a much more discounted price. So we've been launching innovations on the commercial offering front. However, our compensation design hasn't followed. And we realized that we really need to bring the teams together, the pricing team who's recommending offerings with the compensation design team who's thinking about how to better incentivize reps, sales operations who's thinking about setting quotas, bringing those teams together to think about how should we design the compensation plan to accelerate our most strategic programs like the enterprise program that I mentioned. So last year we got those teams together and realized that the number one thing we could do to accelerate enterprise program adoption is in the past, we used to pay a multi-year kicker whenever a rep sold an enterprise program deal, which is a multi-year deal. We paid a kicker for years 2 and year 3, and realized that was somewhat a meaningful incentive, but not enough to really see the behavior change that we expected. We still had many reps who didn't know how to sell an enterprise program deal. So this year, what we've done is we eliminated multi-year kickers and we put everything in the comp plan. So if a rep sells an enterprise program deal, they retire quota even on the year 2 and year 3 amount of that deal. And with that change, we've seen a step change, hockey stick change in terms of adoption, pitches, conversion of enterprise programs has been a huge success.
These are the kind of things where you need to execute across multiple teams, bring everyone together to kind of solve these problems. So you think about kind of like this breaking down of silos and getting across the organization. Yeah, I think that's a great example of bringing it all together. But if you think about the common silos that you've seen in go-to-market teams, and I imagine, both LinkedIn over the years, but even prior to, and specifically as an external consultant looking in other organizations, how do you address these common silos and ultimately overcome them?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a very common trend that we see in any company, any business, which is teams tend to operate in silos. I think that's the role of leadership to go and break the silos and get teams to work together to be consistent. So a few situations in the past where we realized there were silos and system thinking, and there was an opportunity to apply more system thinking. Resource allocation. So at LinkedIn, we have different lines of business. They break down in different regional teams. And every year, because of our business growing, we invest in adding sales headcount on the regional teams. And there's two drivers to add sales headcount: the number of customers that we're growing, but also the definition of account loads that each regional team applies. And we realized that regional teams for the same segment, say mid-market, regional teams were using very different assumptions on account loads. And realized that although some of those assumptions, they had merit, for example, in some regions, reps had to travel more than others. In many cases, there was no really good reason to justify such a huge disconnect in account loads that could be up to 30% different. So we got teams to align on a common set of standards globally, to make sure we are allocating resources on a consistent basis. So this example is more within the same line of business where we had regional teams operating in silos. We had another example in terms of a target setting. As in most SaaS companies, you have the marketing team generating leads. That those leads then they funnel through the sales organization to convert into new business. So at some point, we realized that we had a year where our hunting teams in SaaS, they were behind their targets, they were missing their targets. However, when we looked at our marketing counterparts, marketing was exceeding their targets. And then we started to diagnose to understand what is driving that. And we realized that the teams were operating under a very different set of assumptions, which was resulting in misaligned targets, misaligned philosophies between teams. So we realized that we had to get the teams planning using the same standards, process, methodologies. So the change we implemented is we brought all the planning, marketing, and sales under the same umbrella, using the same set of assumptions and models. And that created alignment across our marketing and sales. So another example of silos, but now those are now functional silos. And like I mentioned in the beginning, teams, and they tend to think in terms of what their immediate team, and they tend to think subsystem. They tend to optimize for whatever's closest to them, which leads to subsystem thinking. But what's best for the company is to promote system thinking. Sometimes we need to sub-optimize the subsystem to optimize the system, and that's when leaders need to step in to intervene to make sure that we're optimizing for the system.
Yeah. I mean, I think the change, it is definitely the right way of thinking. And I love you have to sometimes take a step back, do what's a little bit harder to do within that one geo or one part of the process to drive a better outcome at the high level. Incremental change management, right? You talk about kind of bringing in a leader, having this be an initiative that's kind of pushed down more holistically. I mean, I guess like you can't always have that support, right? Because there's only so many things that the senior leadership is going to prioritize as their top thing. So, like, have you seen or done anything in the past to drive this kind of systems thinking, even at a teams level? Because I love this concept. Yeah, like I wonder if there's any tactics that you use to deploy and achieve that without having to always be kind of more of a push down.
Yeah, great question. So I think it goes back to ultimately a very strong relationship and partnership between ops teams and sales leaders across all levels of the organization. And at LinkedIn, we have large sales teams, large ops teams, and they have a global presence, but they also have regional presence. And you're right. There's no way that global leaders, both in sales and ops, they can intervene and participate of discussions, decisions, even disputes that are happening at the regional level. So the only way we can cross that bridge is having that mindset of system thinking permeating across the organization, and have all the way down to an individual contributor in a regional team be able to sit with a sales leader and understand their point of view, understand what their short, medium, and long-term concerns are, but trying to drive alignment to what the goal of the company is and the goal of the business is. And sometimes that's not possible. And that's when I mentioned some of the tools that I use to drive alignment, like 5D escalation and 5D alignment and clean escalation. So having your teams trained on how to manage stakeholders is really important. That's a vital skill in the ops function.
Yeah. Okay, no, that makes sense. And so, I mean, maybe just digging into some of these tools and frameworks. Would love to better understand which of these tools have been game changers for you and aligning that go-to-market function and go-to-market teams.
Yeah, I'll give one example of something we implemented a few years ago called one go-to-market planning. So here at LinkedIn, you have the notion of business lines. However, there are more P&L constructs than how we structure the business. So take our largest business, Talent Solutions, for example. That is composed of a sales function, a marketing function, a support function, a customer success function. But each of those sub-functions, they report to their functional groups. There's no one Talent Solutions organization. And with that, we realized that on the planning process, each of those functions, they were more or less following what their functional priorities and functional strategy was, and not necessarily aligning and following what was the right thing to do for the talent solutions business, how I should allocate my functional resources in service of the talent solutions business priorities and strategy for the next fiscal year. As a result, for example, you had some years where the sales team was invested to grow headcount and sales in Asia, but the marketing function was allocating budget, paid media budget to the US. So we created something called one go-to-market planning process. It's been a winning process and we still plan like that, which is even if the functions roll up to their core functions, not to a line of business, we created a managerial construct called one go-to-market planning, where each of those functions, they come together in the planning cycle to make sure they're all making decisions in service of the line of business strategy for the next fiscal year, and allow us also to make trade-offs to say, for me to be able to fund this marketing initiative, we need to take some resources away from sales or from support or for customer success. So allow us to reallocate resources cross-functionally. That has been a tool that's been instrumental to our success at LinkedIn.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sounds, especially given that you have multiple stakeholders within the customer base that you're serving, and so be able to address that. Kind of double clicking into the behavioral and cultural side of this kind of cross team collaboration. How do you best cultivate that culture of collaboration in teams that have competing KPIs or priorities, and kind of double clicking into that?
Right. There's two aspects to helping to cultivate a cultural collaboration. One, and again, I will keep bringing LinkedIn examples. LinkedIn is a very interesting company because on one side, we're a consumer product, consumer platform. We have over 1 billion members coming to the platform to help them with their careers, help them find leads, help them get a job. And on the other hand, we have B2B businesses that represent over 90% of our revenue. So it is a complex company. We have a consumer aspect and a B2B aspect. So how we measure success in a company with that type of complexity. So we have something that we call Core 4. We define 4 metrics that they essentially determine whether we're being successful or not in that year. And 2 of those metrics are related to the consumer platform and related to our business. Consumer platform is weekly active users and then sessions. And then on the business side is revenue and margin. So at the highest level, any function, they should be working to serve one or more of those core 4 metrics. So having teams have that clarity on what they're solving for, and not only themselves having clarity, but teams they're working with having clarity that they're all working together to help hit one of those core 4 metrics, I think is a really interesting way to get teams to understand what their other one is solving for and to work together. An important aspect here, which is behavioral. And I always like to quote this study by Google from many years ago about traits of successful teams, of high performing teams. And that also speaks to collaboration, how teams work well effectively in a cross functional environment. And that study boiled down to a concept of psychological safety. So teams work well together when they feel a high sense or strong sense of psychological safety. And that's measured by what the study calls a healthy tension. And because too much tension between teams is toxic and unproductive, but too little tension leads to complacency.
Yeah, exactly. You're not pushing the bounds. You're not driving
Exactly.
to a better outcome. Yeah.
So team needs to find the spectrum of healthy tension and operate like that. There will always be tension. They just need to manage the amount of tension. So that's how I usually coach my teams to work on a cross-functional environment. And that certainly helps to build a strong collaboration culture.
Where you've done and solved and addressed this kind of misalignment gap or the discrepancies or differences between different parts of the business, how have you seen that directly contribute to revenue growth or change in outcomes for the business?
We used to have an e-learning business. Now it's all under Talent Solutions, but it used to be a separate business called LinkedIn Learning Solutions. And it was a team selling e-learning packages to companies to distribute learning to their employee base. And on the other hand, we have the Talent Solutions business, which is helping companies, selling software to help companies hire people through LinkedIn. So both businesses are selling to different parts of the HR organization, either to the hiring department or to the development or learning department. So realize that, and Talent Solutions was our first business, our largest business. Learning was our more nascent business. And realize that for us to grow learning, the best way would be to leverage an already successful relationship that LinkedIn has with an existing Talent Solutions customer by promoting a cross-sell opportunity, a warm introduction. So having a Talent Solutions rep bring the learning rep. So we created a sort of a lead share program where Talent Solutions reps, they could bring in learning reps to a conversation and pursue a learning solutions deal with a customer. I realized that program was not gaining a lot of traction. And as I started to unpack, realized that how those teams were segmenting their customers and building their territories was fundamentally different. which means that in a learning solutions rep, for them to, cross-sell, to sell into their territory by working with a talent solutions rep, they had to work with 20 or 30 different talent solutions reps. And the reason is they were building their territories in a very different way, and they were not taking that cross-sell opportunity as the primary strategy and using that to determine how they build territories. So we got the different ops teams to work together and get them to build, especially on the learning solution side, build territories in a way that would facilitate those interactions, those collaborations, those lead sharing opportunities. So instead of a learning rep having to work with 20 talent solutions rep, now they have to work with only 4 or 5. And that allowed reps to build rapports, create trust, to build relationships, and to go a lot deeper into the cross-selling opportunities. So I think that was an interesting example of how you got the teams to work together and change their ways of working in service of a greater business goal.
Yeah. I mean, this is maybe it's a separate question, but it ties again to the data and the kind of the pipeline and how everything's connected. But what you're talking about is how interconnected everything in the go-to-market organization is, right? The selling motion of one product to a customer is dependent on all of the other solutions that you're selling, the teams that touch that customer. I mean, this is kind of what makes RevOps, what makes sales comp so difficult is you have to factor in all these business rules, all this different data, and have the dependencies and connectivity so that if I modify a selling motion, I know all the other areas that I need to modify. I mean, I'm curious, and I know this is maybe a little bit different of a question as we talked about, but how are you bringing these types of things to light in a way where you're not waiting for the problems to surface, but you're actually, spotting these things proactively, considering there's always change in go-to-market. It's just a guaranteed fact of life.
It's a good question, Abel. I could answer it in different ways. I will take an approach of measurement, which is one of the key parts of the job. I would argue that if you have an effective measurement system in place that allow you to measure what's going on along all of your customer journey, from an account being a prospect and not spending money with you,
Mhm.
to flowing through the new business lead flow, for you to closing either first transaction, to becoming a customer, to being onboarded using your products, creating upsell opportunities, and you renewing and growing ideally, or preventing churn. If you have a solid measurement system along the customer journey, and by solid, I mean is a measurement system that not only tracks outputs in each part of the customer journey, but also tracks inputs. So how you're allocating your resources and the actions you're taking in each part of the journey. If you have a solid measurement system, allow you to understand new patterns or changes that are happening at any point of the journey. And then when you see a change or a new pattern, and that could be a positive change or a negative change, it could be a leakage, for example, allows you to quickly diagnose and understand what is going on, and then come up with a mitigation plan. Or sometimes could be upside. Sometimes there's areas that are going a lot better than planned, and allow us to understand, hey, there's a group of reps here that figured out how to sell this offering in a much better way. So let's take that learning and expand to the whole sales organization. So I think having a solid measurement system allows us to always be ahead of what's going on in the business.
Yeah, 100%. It's actually one to double click on this. I think the way that I've seen historically, most enterprises have a ton of data, right? You have every email, every meeting, every interaction that's done with the customer is captured somewhere, but it's not structured. It's very difficult, to your point, to measure and have that linkage. But in theory, if you actually set up this data pipeline where you know that this type of interaction that the rep is having, this specific rep within this team is having within this person, within a customer, you map that. You're right. You kind of get this dependency map that you can. It almost surfaces these issues up, but it's not easy because it's complex data, very high data volumes. I mean, this kind of goes to the next set of topics I did want to dive into with you, which is more on like the data accuracy and tying back to kind of forecasting and its predictive analytics that we're talking about. When you have this level of scale of data, when you have this level of scale of interactions and dependencies, how do you ensure that data accuracy and consistency, especially when so many people depend on it across all these different teams?
Yeah, and that's totally top of mind for me and my team, especially now. We are in a journey of migrating CRMs, and for whoever has gone through that process know how long it takes, how complex it is. And I certainly learned it the hard way, because when you migrate CRMs, you don't do that overnight. You migrate CRMs over a period of time. So for a long period of time, your customer data will be fragmented into different CRMs. So this topic is critical for me, because for a period of time, we had to figure out how to report and what was going on with our customers, and is our data accurate or not. And that was especially challenging in a world where you have your data spread in multiple CRMs. So our solution to that problem is we built in-house an offline data set based on data warehouse that essentially merged data from both CRMs and allowed user teams to report data on a unified fashion. This hasn't been pretty. The first iteration of that data set, we faced 40 hours of latency. So from the transaction happening in the CRM to that transaction being represented in that data set took 40 hours, which is a lot. So for over a year, we worked with our engineering teams, with our data science teams to make that infrastructure really enterprise grade. So we were able to bring latency down from 40 hours to 5 hours. We now have SL 24/7 SLA support with engineering. We had hundreds of tables. We reduced that to just over a dozen tables, and now that infrastructure became sort of the standard of how we report in our B2B business at LinkedIn. It also enabled us to create the notion of source of truth, because we point all teams, finance teams, marketing teams, sales teams, to report from the same source. So you don't have to deal with that challenge anymore of teams reporting with different data, different criteria, and different metrics. So top of mind, but it's a journey that we're still navigating here at LinkedIn.
Yep. I feel like when you have these migrations, you also have a moving target. Like the way your go-to-market teams are structured and operate is different from when you start that migration to when you're done. And so it's kind of like this, it's constantly ever evolving implementation that you're working on, which, makes it very difficult. So I empathize because I've been there, and we've seen firsthand the scale of these types of projects. But, you think about both when you're in this type of moment and this change, but even as you think about kind of like this even ongoing past an implementation, one of the most critical things is maintaining trust in the data, right? The moment you lose trust in the data from the sales organization, it takes away and adds just this massive overhead of noise and questions and back and forth broken telephone communications that end up happening. How do you maintain not only the hygiene but trust, because things are going to go wrong and issues are going to come up occasionally?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, one thing that's top of mind is, if you're asking a sales rep to enter a piece of information, make sure that it's critical, make sure that it's necessary. I've often seen us requesting reps to enter information that is a nice to have, that is not a must have. And there's just so many nice to haves. And when you pause and zoom out, you're then seeing reps having to enter, hundreds of fields in multiple opportunities every week. And there's always trade-off between quantity and quality. The more data you ask reps to enter, the less quality you're going to see. So simplifying and only ask reps and managers to enter and maintain the minimum amount of necessary critical data is, for me, is a key success factor. Well, for example, in the past, we used to have weekly forecasting meetings and forecasting process. So we asked reps to submit or to update their opportunity data every week, and realized, listen, if we move from weekly to bi-weekly, so every other week, we don't lose forecasting accuracy. And we did this fast. So suddenly we told reps, hey, you only need to update your data every other week. But when you do that, I want you to just to spend the right amount of time and to be as precise as possible. So we saved reps time. At the same time, we increased the quality of the information that you're getting. So for me, having data that's 100% perfect is utopic, and it's not going to happen. So I think you need to have very clear what your business goal is here. And for example, your goal is forecasting accuracy, and you want to be, say, within plus or minus 2% of whatever call you made at the beginning of the quarter. So that's your goal. And then work backwards from that to understand what type of data inputs, needs, and data quality standards you need to achieve that business goal. So work backward from your business goal to determine what level of data quality is necessary and acceptable. That's how I would think about it.
Yeah, no, I like that. You have to always be experimenting. I love that that you're iterating to test and see how you optimize the process because it's a cost, right? You're taking an entire team and taking time away from them on a weekly basis. So it's a great takeaway for anyone who's not experimenting and trying out and testing, really validating, testing, pushing their assumptions. So, just before we get to the last segment here, a couple questions more broadly on the tie-in of sales comp and the broader go-to-market alignment. So again, you think about, at LinkedIn, how does sales comp factor into that broader picture of go-to-market strategy and thinking?
Our compensation plan used to be extremely simple to the point of being somewhat simplistic. It used to be essentially $1 target that a seller could achieve by selling any mix of products. And over time, we started to get a lot more sophisticated on our product offering. And we realized that for us to ensure that reps are taking their time to train and to learn how to sell a new offering that usually is more complex and sales cycles are longer, we need to make changes to the plan to be intentional to create that extra focus. And I gave the example of how we moved away from multi-year kickers to put everything in the quota. And our thinking is that go-to-market strategy and compensation strategy, they should go hand in hand. So now that's how we think about our go-to-market changes on an annual basis. Together with our planning cycle, we determine what are the biggest priorities of the business. For example, is there a new product in production coming up? And then we think about what are the sales compensation design changes that we want to implement in service of the business strategy. So they go hand in hand, and currently it's very deeply ingrained.
No, it's the way it should be. I mean, at the end of the day, you set out a strategy and emotion, and then you incentivize and motivate. But yeah, it can't be done separately. And then maybe just like a broader question. I mean, obviously you get feedback from sales teams on process, on operations. What do you think about the role of the sales rep feedback when it comes to how you think about comp strategies, how you think about implementing any sort of sales ops changes within the model? How critical is that feedback from the sales organization, and how do you use it?
Great question. And like I mentioned, we haven't made a lot of changes to our comp plan until recently, the example I gave. And this change that we made of moving away from multi-year kickers and into this credit uplift model, it was a very large change. And something that we did well is we invested a good 3 months in change management ahead of the change. And as part of that change management process, we ran focus groups with sales reps and managers to explain the proposal and hear their feedback. And one thing that I found was very interesting is the project team was very worried about having a very negative repercussion with sales reps because some of them might feel we're taking away something that was guaranteed. They were paid multi-year kickers on top of their comp plan. So we're taking that away and instead giving quota credit for them to do their work. However, as part of the focus groups, we show data, some simulations that show that, hey, actually, if you are within our top quartile reps, our top 25% reps, and you are doing the thing that you would like you to do, selling enterprise programs, you're actually going to make a lot more money than you make today. And that had a disproportionate positive impact on the rep base. So learn that there's some things that really matter for sales reps. In this example, showing that if they are a top quartile rep and 100% rep sales reps, they want to be or they think they are top quartile, and showing that they would be better off in this example, it was a huge motivator. And we thought this change was going to be really hard for us to manage and communicate to the field. That actually was very easy because of that effect, the psychological effect that we're able to show to reps that if they do well and they do what we're expecting to do, they would be better off in the new model. So
Yep.
one example to address your question that I learned personally, that bring reps along early and ask them what matters to them and showing what they're trying to solve for and get their early feedback is essential when you're making big changes to the comp plan.
Yeah. 100%. I think you need to show them how they're going to game their comp plan to maximize their earnings. And when that happens, it benefits the business, it benefits them, and there's kind of that perfect alignment. So, but here getting their buy-in and building that narrative, I mean, that's kind of the art of selling or, rolling out any incentive plan or any change really. Okay, so I'd love to sip into the next segment. This is the hot seat. It's the opportunity to kind of think past the standard, the status quo, and use this time to kind of talk about hot takes that you have. So, different perspectives. I'd love to hear anything that kind of helps us disrupt the way that we're all thinking about things today. And so if you're ready, let's dive right in. Okay, so one thing that's guaranteed in sales ops in most organizations is that you have an endless supply of tools that you use. So are companies today investing in too many tools for sales ops teams? And what's your perspective on, if so, what is enough?
Great. Yes, companies are investing too much, and often they're investing on the wrong things. Tool proliferation is a huge problem across the whole industry when I talk to peers. And this is why ROI and utilization is becoming more and more top of mind for sales ops leaders, rev ops leaders. There's just too much waste, too much confusion going on. And in the past, I've seen companies do really smart build versus buy assessment when there's a new need that comes up. And I would go one level further. And if there's a new need for a tool that comes up, it's not only a build versus buy, it's build versus buy versus using something that already is in place. For example, a few months ago, one team pitched that we should buy this tool to help managers coach their sales reps. And at the same time, we already have a pretty solid adoption with Gong. And we realized that Gong, they can be used as a coaching tool for sales managers and maybe answer 80% of the needs that were being requested. So one example of how, an existing tool serves an emerging need. So going through this reflection of build versus buy versus use something already in place is how I've been thinking about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is where every incremental tool that you have adds another interaction. It's like a data interaction, it's a translation. And so you think going back to that previous point of like, if you're able to track all the data flowing through the system and use that to kind of measure and make better decisions, you have to think about the tech burden and the kind of overhead that you add to your business and how much further you slow it down with each and every incremental tool. The tool proliferation has made it easier to solve hyper niche problems quickly, but at the cost of, not having the systems thinking that you were talking about before, right? It's very much subsystem optimization versus system optimization. So let's go to the extreme other end. So now if you were to keep 3 tools and only 3 tools to manage your entire sales ops tech stack, I mean, I know that's kind of crazy, but what would those 3 be?
Probably gonna need more than 3 to manage the whole business, but I'll tell you my favorite 3. I will start with Power BI, which is for me is the world-class visualization tool. My teams became fan of Power BI and sales teams as well in terms of users, super high adoption. The second tool, I alluded to it earlier in the conversation, is the cross LOB data set, this offline data warehouse built data set that consolidates all the go-to-market data into one single source of truth and is accessible to all users who are reporting on go-to-market data, and created a lot of alignment and streamlined reporting across LinkedIn. And the third one was another in-home built tool called Team Hub. It's a tool that allows sales ops and managers to move accounts around very quickly whenever there is an open territory, for example, and something that created a lot of agility with the field and sales ops.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's about, I mean, you kind of touched on the key critical problems and challenges, the fact that the reporting, visualizations, the system of record for self-performance data, which rarely sits in one spot for most enterprises,
Yeah.
and the management of the go-to-market strategy and motion, which sits within territory and quota, right? I mean, effectively, it's kind of the premise behind it. I guess when you think about this myth of perfect data, right? We always talk about, okay, like we need to get to accurate data. Is that a thing? Or is it just a waste of time to hyper focus on getting data perfect?
And I alluded to it on another question. So I think this is a myth. First of all, data will never be 100% accurate or perfect, especially when data is being created by humans. You are asking sales reps to enter a piece of data. It will never be 100% accurate or even fresh.
Or even if we're using AI in the future, there's going to always be some sort of element of inaccuracy. Yeah.
Exactly. And like I mentioned, you need to think about and be intentional about what exactly the business outcomes that you want to drive with that data. For example, you want to drive stability to the business through a very accurate forecasting. Okay, that's a really important business outcome. And then based on that goal or that expected outcome, what are your data needs along the process? So working back from that objective to what your data needs are to determine what are data accuracy standards. And I gave the example of, we realized that we don't really need to get reps to update their opportunities, their pipeline every week. If they do that every other week, it's good enough for us to meet our forecasting accuracy standards.
Okay, well, maybe just wrapping up here with some closing questions. I'd love to get your input on, in the world of sales ops, who would you most like to take out to lunch, and what would you want to talk about?
I would definitely want to take out to lunch the RevOps leader at OpenAI. Is a company, I'm based in San Francisco. This company is also headquartered here in San Francisco. And I think it's fascinating how they went from zero revenue to multi-billion in just a few quarters. So understanding that experience, how they scaled the companies so quickly from being a product-led company to now having a team of sellers and serving companies from all sizes, how they went through that journey, how they expand their sales force, how they thought about target setting, incentive plans, all of that would be fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, the magnitude of scale there is just like unfathomable. It's hard to imagine the amount of change that happened in as quick of a time as that. So yeah, it's a great pick. So second question and final question before we wrap up: what's a sales management book, or really a resource that you've used that's helped you? It could book, reference material that the audience should check out and use to help themselves.
I would suggest I'll mention perhaps a book that is my favorite book of all time. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. He won a Nobel Prize in this field of behavioral psychology, which essentially says that human beings are flawed in terms of how they make decisions, they make choices. And more importantly, the books gives advice, tips on how to overcome some of those flaws. So for really any person, but for people like us who are working with data and are making decisions based on data on a daily basis, I think it's a fundamental book.
It's a great book. It's a great recommendation, and I wholeheartedly agree. In sales, obviously the behavioral psychology aspects of it come to life, but in any decision making at scale of us, for sure. Akira, it's great to have this conversation. I think, I just want to thank you again for all the input and all the guidance and you sharing your experiences with us and the rest of the audience. So thank you.
I appreciate that. It was my pleasure, Nick.
The Sales Competition Show is brought to you by Forma AI, the sales performance management platform that fully integrates sales planning with rapid, scalable incentive compensation management. Our data platform brings together how you can plan and manage the entire lifecycle of territories, quotas, and incentives. With global customers like Autodesk, Stryker, and Hootsuite, we enable go-to-market teams to plan and deploy even the most complex SPM strategies at speed, taking you from idea to execution instantly. To learn more about Forma AI, visit our website at forma.ai. Hit the subscribe button and find more episodes of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in.